Hello. In this second part of the tutorial I will demonstrate how to set up and animate the material effect in Unreal Engine. Let's first prepare the texture files in Photoshop. I create a new document with 2048 by 2048 pixels, which is enough resolution for this effect. The background should be black. With the polygon lasso I create a selection, which is straight at the top and jagged at the bottom. The texture will be stretched in Unreal vertically so that the spikes result in a nice trail effect. I fill the selection with white and save the file. For the second shape I want to animate the texture radially outwards. I simply rotate the canvas by 90 degrees and save this as a new texture file. Now let's create a new Unreal project. A blank games template is fine, and starter content not necessary. I create a new level. Import the textures and the OBJ files. Because Houdini is Y up and Unreal is Z up, we rotate them by 90 degrees around the X-axis. With one of the textures selected, I create a material. The texture needs to be plugged into the emissive color slot. With the Alt key we can break the connection to the base color. In the material details, set the blend mode to additive and the shading model to unlit. We want to see the backside and make it two-sided. Now let's add a vertex color node and multiply it with the texture. To control the color of the effect, we create a constant 3 vector. I change the color and increase the intensity to 50 for a nice glowy effect. This color also needs to be multiplied with the texture. By right-clicking on the color node we can convert it to a parameter. This allows us to change the value later in a material instance, and to see the result immediately on our object in the level. Let's create a texture coordinates node. This gives us the U and V coordinates. With a component mask we can split the two vector. R stands for U and G stands for V here. Now I want to multiply the U component with a parameter. This will allow us to scale the texture. I create a scalar parameter and rename it to UScale. The default value should be 1. When we now add something to the result, we can move the texture. Let's create an add node and another scalar parameter. I rename it to ULocation. Now we can copy-paste the nodes and reuse it for creating the same setup for the V coordinate. Once we have finished the setup for modifying the separated U and V values, we can append them back to create the required 2-vector UV coordinates. This goes into the texture UVs. Now let's convert the texture into a parameter, so that we can easily swap it later in the material instance. Finally, save the material. Now we can create a material instance and apply it to the first mesh. Let's move the object to the origin. In the material instance, let's change the scale along V direction so that the texture covers the whole ribbon. With the V location parameter, we can move the texture around. To see the glow also in the level, I just deactivate game settings and lower the exposure value. In the texture details, I set the Y-axis tiling to clamp. Now the texture is not tiled anymore in this direction. Let's duplicate the material instance for the other two shapes. Drag the other shapes into the level. And zero out the position to have it aligned with the other shape. Apply the material instances. Open the third material instance. Change the color. And see if it moves around properly. Nice. Now let's open the second material instance and choose another color. For this shape, I want to move the texture radially, which means in U direction. So let's reset the parameters related to V. When we change location and scale in U direction, we already see some motion. I replace the default texture with the rotated version. Now the texture is moving outwards. We just need to disable tiling. In the texture details, I set the X-axis tiling to clamp and save the change. The material instance looks good and can also be saved. Now let's create a sphere and move it to the center. To animate the materials, we need a level sequence. Select the objects you want to animate. And in the level sequence, add current selection. Add tracks for the static mesh component and the material parameter for element 0. Now we can add tracks for the material parameters we want to animate. I start with the V location on the first shape. There was a key set automatically at the first frame. I move forward in the timeline and set another key. When we change the number and move the time slider, we can see the motion in the viewport. Let's continue with the second shape. Here I want to move the texture outwards and need to animate the U location. I want to happen it later and move this keyframe. I create another one just after the animation on the first shape. Here the texture should start to move. And here disappear. Maybe this radial motion looks better at the end. Just after the spiral with some overlap. Let's see how it looks when we begin with the orbital move. When I click on the keyframe, I can change the value. Here I want to start with 0. The texture disappears at a V location of around 6, so let's set this as the end value. And move it closer to the next animation. There is a problem with the last one, so let's fix this. Now it's working. I set the playback mode to loop. And play. Not bad. But more overlap is probably better. Let's open the curve editor for fine-tuning. I want to ease out the curve so that it's moving faster in the beginning and slows down at the end. Thanks for watching.